Thank you so much. Well, it's from the sublime that we've just seen to the core blimey. It's been, I want to say, first of all, what a pleasure it's been to come to Australia. The Hizmet movement are amazing. I've been to universities and Hizmet centres across Australia. This is my fifth city in 2.5 weeks. And every place, it is joy, which is at the centre of what we've been doing. And I want to really reinforce that. Can you all hear me, by the way? Yeah, yeah. I've never had one of these before. You know, I've seen them being used in opera and so forth. And whoa, yeah. I just want to reinforce. Hizmet is under the cosh at the minute, and they're suffering. Yeah, themselves and their families. But as they're in the middle of all that suffering, what they show is open-hearted hospitality. They're not defending themselves, they're opening themselves out to be with others and to minister to others as much as anything else. That's amazing. I think a round of applause for these guys is definitely needed. Okay, right. Half an hour and let's see where it goes. I want to start by saying I don't think we're in an age of anxiety. Okay, you know, historians and sociologists and academics in general tend to want to say we are in the age of, and yeah, you know, it sells books, but I'm not sure that it's true. I'm going to be talking a little bit about anxiety. I'm going to be talking about religious leadership. I'm going to go fairly rapidly, but I will try and get a bit of conversation going. I'm going to be talking about the practice of responsibility in leadership as focused in integrity and the meaning of integrity. And then finally, that core notion of dialogue and narrative, that becomes the heart, it seems to me, of leadership. Anxiety, I don't think we are in an age of anxiety. You'll all know this wonderful painting by Pieter Bruegel, not Bruegel. I'm told by a Dutchman that this is the correct pronunciation. Bruegel, the elder, hunted in the snow. What does that picture tell you? Anything that lots. Listen, you guys in the camera. Are you okay if I wander across? Yeah, okay, right. It's a remarkable painting. Bruegel has such a grasp of detail, but he's constantly making you think. In a way, he's an example of dialogue and art. In the foreground, we see these guys who are coming home from the hunt. Look at them. Their heads are down. Yeah? There's lots of detail. There are the footprints of a hare which has escaped down there. They don't have many things that they've got. Look at the dogs. Now, they really are fed up, aren't they? You know, they're depressed. They're focusing on that. These guys are, well, I'm not sure what they're doing. It looks as though the whole thing's falling down as far as I can see. And then from the foreground to the midground, and the midground is astonishing. I've seen this in the Kunsthistorie Museum in Vienna. And I went in thinking I would do the museum in 2 hours. I sat watching this for 2 hours. Because it is so powerful. In the midground, all kinds of things. They're really enjoying it. This woman here is pulling a mate along on a sledge. These guys are skating. Nature continues. What's going on in the background? What can you see? Sorry? A bird? Okay. Well, that's more in the middle ground. What about the background? It may not be easy to see from mountains. And that's where you start to worry, because the guy was from the Low Countries. And do the Low Countries have any mountains? No, precisely. So what you've got here is a remarkable painting that comes from near to the beginning of the Little Ice Age in the 16th and 17th century. In the 16th and 17th century, there was climate change and the Little Ice Age. And if you read Geoffrey Parker's book on, what's the title again? It's about global crises, and it's war and crises and climate change in the 17th century. Yeah? Nothing new about climate change. Nothing new about crises. At that point, there were more wars in Europe than any time in history. And they were connected: immigration, climate, wars, etc. They were all together. The important point is, of course, that Berkeley is reminding us that this is the Little Ice Age, and who knows, it might be coming across even to the Low Countries, but nobody is aware of it. All the anxiety that's whizzing around up there, these guys are just focused on living and staying alive. Okay, it's an obvious point. I don't think there is an age of anxiety. I think we are constantly in anxiety, in some part, in some way, in our global community. The problem is not that we're in an age of anxiety. The problem are these guys. Yeah. Throughout history, you know, one of the Caesars here, and we all know who he is, and we all know who he is. Isn't it amazing? It's always this, isn't it? This is the pose. This is the pose. Whoa! You know, and here we have political leadership which is actually saying they want anxiety. They are hoping to not create anxiety, but actually to lock into a propensity that all of us has to be anxious. We're all of us anxious. What's happening? Wait, it's my specs. I'm getting anxious. You know, because one of the things about these guys is they want fear. They want to create. They want to lock into our fear. Nothing new. We all fear. They want to control. They want dependency. Leadership here is about dependency. They want polarization, them and us. They want to clearly see the other as somebody who is a threat. They want defense. We are going to defend against the other. And it's a monovocal situation. They don't create this. They lock into it. I know about this because I come from the UK. And Brexit is all about this. Mrs. May is an interesting leader. She's a determined leader. We mustn't be not too hard on her. Nonetheless, even she at one point began to polarize. A week and a half ago, she said, the government are the patriots, and we are behind you, the nation, who has spoken in one voice. And the MPs, and the MPs are the traitors. She didn't use the word traitor, but it was very close. That's extraordinary. It's not surprising that within a week of that speech, we saw 6 million people sign a petition online to revoke Article 50. Oh, yeah, it's creating polarization, creating fear, creating conflict. No, it's not creating conflict. It's fastening into conflict. The conflict is there. If you ever get a chance to read a book by John Paul Lederach called Moral Imagination, please read it. John Paul Lederach, The Moral Imagination, 2005. He's a peace builder and an academic. Remarkable guy. And he begins from the point that we are conflictual by definition as humans. And therefore we must never be surprised when all these things happen. You know, we all say, it's unbelievable. They're polarizing. It's not unbelievable. That's what we do as human beings. We polarize and we characterize others as a threat to us. And leaders want to control. Okay, you saw on this dear fella. Do you all know who he is? Ian Paisley. Yes, good man. Well, actually, he was a good man, wasn't he? And that's the extraordinary thing. He's the only one of these three who actually changed. Four, rather. Yeah, and he changed in a remarkable way. Before he changed, it was entirely about control. I met him on a set. Sorry? That's Mussolini. Mussolini. And that's one of the Caesars. I think it's Caesar Augustus. Yeah. Just to give you an historical perspective. There's a great apocryphal story about Paisley. Control. He's talking to his congregation, and he's talking about the ultimate control, which is what will happen when you die. And there will be weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth, he cried. And on the front row, a little lady said, Mr. Paisley, I have no teeth. And- but the ultimate controller responds, "Madam, teeth will be provided." Yeah? Control, yes. Okay, I'm going to be please, I'm a priest, I'm an Anglican priest. So what I'm going to say now is about religious leadership. It's only a partial reflection. But what I want to say is that it's the same issue with religious leaders, even though religious leaders are the good guys. Yeah. Do you know that wonderful story by Cormac McCarthy, The Road? The Road. It was turned into a very depressing film. And along the way, this father is defending. Is that clock right? Yeah, that's fine. It is. Yeah, that's fine. It's good. We'll be on time. After an apocalyptic crisis in America, the father is taking his son with him, defending him to get to the south, where he hopes there will be salvation of some kind. He's defending him with a gun. He has 6 bullets only, but he knows he has to defend because it's a terrible time where you're liable to be raped, killed and eaten by people who see you. It's an extraordinary conflictual time. The father at this point then gets his gun out when an old man comes towards the tins that they're carrying full of provisions and asks for some food. And the father gets his gun out and says, "Get away or I'll shoot you." And then the son produces that beautiful question. Dad, actually it was more like Pa, are we still the good guys? That's such a powerful question. If I've got anything to say today from any of the research that's been done on leadership and so forth, it's the power of question. The power of question. If you're going to look to your organizations, to your political leaders, to your religious leaders, you've got to look at the health of the questioning culture. And look what happened in many a church, in particular in the recent Roman Catholic problems. For many leaders, this notion of leadership is about defending the church. And you can understand that. But the question is, are we still the good guys? Defending the church, is that an end in itself? Is that a purpose that should be primary in terms of what we're doing as leaders? Defending the bella figura. That was a quote from a cardinal who said we must defend the bella figura of the church, the beautiful face of the church. Do you know who else defends the bella figura? The mafia. They actually use that phrase. We must defend our bella figura. Whoa. I'm not knocking leadership in the Roman Catholic Church. I'm with them. I'm a priest and all that sort of thing. But the important thing is the questions. We have to question how we lead. We have to question the way in which we present that leadership. Then the dynamic consistently from the mid-1990s was to blame other people. Homosexuals. They were the one who caused all the crisis. Then there was a pushback. No. There's no correlation between pederasty and homosexuality. Okay, it's the Western morality. It's those Americans. They're all the same. Whoa. And then they discovered that it was happening across the world, not just in America. And a whole series of defensive, anxious responses. The leaders were anxious. The leaders were defensive. It wasn't just they were trying to make others defensive and anxious. They were themselves anxious and defensive. Defend the institution is crucial. You guys have been going through this in the last week. I hear about the question of the steel of the confession. And that's a massive, massive question. We need to have people questioning why it might be thought to be right to maintain the seal of the confession if there is somebody who has sexually abused a child who is confessing to you. A whole bunch of questions. And we keep coming back to the children, who are the ones who very often ask these questions. In Scotland, where I used to be, they call it the daft laddie questions. The simple, naive questions that none of us dare ask in case somebody says, that's simple and naive. Power structure within education. But don't forget, within that whole religious side, there's massive ambiguity and plural narratives. For all the problems that are there with the leadership, we have a Roman Catholic Church that is full of questioning people who are trying to assert a different narrative, who are trying to develop a different approach. And I suppose my question is, how far are those dialogues really being thought through? Are they being thought through within? Are they being thought through without? Are they being worked through? Big questions. So you see, I don't think much of leaders. Yeah, and one of the problems is that we've got too many myths, unexamined myths about leadership. It's there in business studies. It's there across most sectors. The leader is somebody who knows everything. I mean, dear old Donald actually says that. I know everything. He actually says it. Gosh. But for the leader, for a CEO in a major organization, they don't have to say it. We assume it. We assume it. Because, this is no funny myth. This is a serious myth. Because we build everything around it. We even build remuneration for the CEOs around this myth. And it is a total myth. We must pay them a massive amount of money, 400 times more than the cleaner, yeah, because there are only 2 or 3 people who could do this job. It's called the theory of the limited marketplace. It is nonsense, absolute nonsense. There is no empirical evidence to say that only 1 or 2 people can do this job. There is none. So why does the myth perpetuate? Partially because we quite enjoy it. We want somebody to know everything. We want them to take all the responsibility. That's what happened with Brexit. They said to Mrs May, you can take over, you're the leader, and then all the Tory party immediately shoved all the responsibility onto her, who they're now blaming for all the, you know, it's a crazy world, crazy world. Okay. So we mustn't forget that actually, despite all that, all of these, the political and the religious, is full of ambiguity, full of massively different narratives, very complex, plural narratives. And so leadership, the critical thing, starts to move through to how we deal with the ambiguity and the plural narratives, with the complexity. I suppose we have to try and have leaders who have integrity. Would that be a good start? Hands up here, how many of you have integrity? Whoa! I think that's an interesting one. You know, because, yeah. I think there are more people who don't think they've got integrity here than there are who do think they've got integrity. No, there are more who are not declaring that they've got integrity. We could spend the rest of the day just talking about integrity. But the whole point about integrity is it's about your identity. It's your identity. It's who you are. And that's a rather fun thing, isn't it? Because again, I always thought that the best response was from a nurse who said, I cannot tell you if I have integrity. It's for somebody else to tell you if I have integrity. And that tells you that integrity is a social phenomenon. It is not a simple individual virtue. Again, it relies on dialogues emerging now. It relies on dialogue. You know, how do you see yourself? How do you see yourself as a leader? How, you know, do you see yourself as the good guy? I don't suppose Jim McNamara is here. Jim McNamara, are you here? No. Well, Jim McNamara is an academic who is in the technical
Communications, Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences at UTS.
Communications expert. He's a great man. He's a great man. He's done a wonderful piece of work on the architecture of listening in organisations. Just fantastic. And he's got a wonderfully powerful bit in that research where he says to these CEOs, "How do you lead?" And they say, "We're dialogic." Yeah, that's great. Then he says, "Can I just check out your communication systems?" Yeah? And he finds that 80% of their communication is one way. But the trick is, they think. They're dialogic. Their self-image is that they're dialogic. Now, who's to know that these people who think that they've got integrity have actually got integrity? Who's to know? We can't know unless they're in dialogue. Yeah, is that okay? It's got to be that kind of dialogue. And dialogue then becomes critical to leadership. If you've got leaders who are not in dialogue, you're in trouble. You're in trouble. Most of the great crises that occurred in the last 10 years, 20, 30 years, way beyond, are because there was no dialogue. The Mid-Staffs Hospital crisis, where they think over 1,000 patients died unnecessarily in 2007, or within 5 years, around that, was because there was no dialogue. Absolutely no dialogue. Monovocal. And in this case, the monovocality was to do with, we will be a foundation hospital, and by doing that, we will become independent and be able to decide for ourselves what we do with our money. And isn't that wonderful? You had that incredible moment where the management at Mid-Staffs Hospital were actually dishing out £40 Amazon vouchers to each of the staff for successfully achieving the foundation status. And at the same day, the first of 5 inquiries was beginning into the extraordinarily... It was a huge scandal. Huge scandal. Wow. So we don't know what we're at. And part of the problem is, of course, those 4 guys who used to thought they had integrity. They thought they had it. Let's whiz on. If you want to know more about this, you can buy that book. It's not... It's quite expensive. It's the sort of book that you should buy for your library. Get your library to buy the book. That's the thing. That's where I try and work some of that through, but that's focused in business. Integrity. Often it's seen as this idea of the integrity itself. Often it's about principles and practice, walking the talk, etc., etc. Sometimes about active judgment and strength of will. Epistemic virtue, it gives you greater knowledge. You're able to stand back and understand the situation more. I do like this splendid one of Aristotle. He doesn't have a word for integrity. He has instead the virtue of aletheo, truthfulness, the reliable and consistent presentation of the self. How often do you present yourself? How often do you present yourself? And to whom? And which bit of yourself do you present when you present yourself? You all know the Joe Harry window? Yeah. That's why dialogue is the only way of presenting the self. Yeah. The problem with all of these, though, as philosophical approaches to integrity, is that you can always end up being polarized. I think I've got integrity, so these are my principles, these are my virtues, I'm going to walk that talk. And that's what Paisley did, and that's what Trump does, and he believes he has integrity. And his followers believe that he has integrity. That's why it's worth reading Jonathan Haidt, The Righteous Mind, 2013, moral psychologist, and he argues that, first of all, that we make our ethical decisions almost instantly. Neuroscience, yeah? Big bit of the brain goes boomf as we make the decision, and it's fairly instant. Rest of the time, we're rationalizing it. And the rest of the time, we are gravitating towards groups that reinforce what we think. And hence, Haidt talks about the Democrats and the Republicans and the way in which they don't see each other. And yet, astonishingly, they share principles. Freedom. But their view of freedom is quite different, because their view is based upon a worldview which is, certainly in one case, highly defensive. Back to the question of defense, back to the question of fear, etc. Of course, Haidt wasn't the first. Gilbert and Sullivan were quite aware of this division. They, as you'll know, with Iolanthe, with Willis, yes, who's standing outside. Every babe that's born into this world alive is either a little liberal or a little conservative. Yes, that assumption that you are one of the tribes. Now, of course, intriguingly, Brexit is showing us even that isn't true. Each of the tribes had been breaking up, Brexit breakings, and suddenly Mrs. May's having to deal with super complexity within her own organisation, her own party. Keeps going back to this notion of how do we deal with that complexity? Well, the argument is, I argue that integrity is basically around the three modes of responsibility, which are, number one, you know and try to work out what you think, what you feel, how you see the world. Are you responsible for your perceptions of the world? Or do you get them from somebody else? Do you ever question how you perceive the world? Does anybody else question how you perceive the world? The whole notion of attributability is taking responsibility for all of these things, which means subjecting all of these things, what we believe to be worth and purpose in our actions, what we believe to be the principles that we have, it's subjecting them to critical conversation and critical reflection. Now, you look at that and you think, it's these blessed academics, look at that. You know, we don't want to have to digest all of this stuff. You'll be a better person if you read that book. And no. You'll be a better person if you take this seriously around the dinner table. I've got a great expert on all of this, and his name is Arthur, and he's 7 years old, and he's my oldest grandson. And around the dinner table, and this is where we go back to your point about children. Around the dinner table, he frequently introduces conversations about respect and justice and all the great principles. And he wants to know about them and how they are being embodied in the serving of the food and why Grandpa is getting more than him. That's a serious moment, because that's something about understanding justice as fairness and understanding core principles of respect. And it's a tricky one, because again, you've got a complexity of narratives flying across the table, and it can be tricky, for sure. At one point, he was challenging my son, his father, and my son went, and Arthur at that point thought, yeah, okay, I won't push it any further, as my son turned away, he looked at me and he rolled his eyes. Now, at that point, I've got to work out what my responsible reaction is. Do I roll my eyes at him, or do I get the conversation going further? Around the dinner table, there has to be conversation, there has to be dialogue. But it's recognizing that this whole thing of knowing what you're talking about, how you feel, etc., this whole thing, which eventually leads to states like so-called metacognition, where you can actually begin to understand yourself, see yourself in some way, recognizing that only emerges through dialogue. There is no other way of doing it. Okay, accountability. How many people here trust your leaders? Hands up. It's a serious question. How many people?
This is a serious response.
Very good, very good. Not anymore. Okay, that's fair enough. But it's a critically important point. Leaders are very hard to trust. And one of the problems is that we like the myth of the great leader, we have the myth of the unconditional trust. It's all based in, of course, nonsense. It's child-parent stuff. Most of us spend our lives trying to work out why we didn't trust our mother and father. But actually, then we work out it's okay. It's okay. Trust is about being able to develop conditional trust, because that's what a relationship is about. A quick example, I'll stop talking in about 7 minutes. Okay? Is that okay? Is that okay? Yeah. Is that okay? 5. Okay. Yeah. Well, give me this story first and then 5. Is that okay? I've got you. It's fair enough. But it's a great story, and that's the other point. Leadership should come through narrative and stories, organisational stories, and so forth. The great point was from Freeman, who was the originator of stakeholder theory. And when they asked him what was his theory, he said it's actually about pushback. Enabling pushback with all the relationships that we have as a business with all these stakeholders. E.g., he said, my 10-year-old son, who's a stakeholder, said to him, no, he said to the son, sorry son, I can't get this year to the camp, the summer camp, because I've been invited to a really important conference to give the keynote. And of course he was expecting the son to say, wow, you're important, aren't you? The son held eye contact. Eye contact is critical to dialogue, because dialogue, and this is implication of much of dear old Jim McNamara's work, I think, this is critical to, dialogue is not dialectic. It's not about arguing and discussing ideas. It's about sharing who we are. Dialogue is ontological, the big word of the week. It's ontological. It's who we are that we are sharing. So the son looks at him in the eyes and says, Dad, what's more important to you, your family or your work? What a nice question. The power of that question, and how the power within the father suddenly starts to quake a little bit. Response, well, of course it's my family. Eye contact maintained. It doesn't look like it, Father. Wow. What an incredible 10-year-old question. Much more powerful. You know, we've got to. Bakhtin says that dialogue. You guys have been in dialogue for some time, which is great, and you were doing 2 years and so forth. But dialogue doesn't happen when you blow a whistle or give a starter's gun. Dialogue is always happening, and the important thing is just to spot it and join in and be a part of it and respond to it. And this is what these guys were doing, you know. So the father says, okay, right, I'm going to promise that next year there'll be no way that we'll have our camp experience put to one side. I'll be there. The son graciously says, okay. But at that moment, their relationship has changed from unconditional trust to conditional trust. I want to see if you actually do fulfill what you promised. Okay, so that's part of the accountability. That's about how we develop that, and the accountability has to be mutual. Think of your leaders. How many of them are really accountable to you? And how do they give their accountability to you? Ongoing. Yeah, positive responsibility. This is the third mode of responsibility, which is about shared responsibility. Levinas and Ricoeur and all these guys are really into this point of positive responsibility. And this is about moral imagination, seeing the possibilities. And you don't see the possibilities without dialogue. You don't see the possibilities without seeing how they might be developed by yourself and others. Have a look at Lederach. He's great. Give me 2 more minutes. The remember that rhetoric. Okay, you do that. Yeah. The remember that rhetoric is not all bad. The really good guys in terms of rhetoric are Bakhtin and Aristotle. But of course, dear old Plato too. But rhetoric, it has to be in dialogue. It has to be based in dialogue. Have a look at that and see how that works. And critically, it's partially about the communication of your character. How do you communicate your character? Have a think. When did you last practice courage? When did you last practice courage? Have a think about it. You know, it's worth reflecting on. I can't go through all this, but here's a good example of dialogue. dear old Henry V, when he gives his St. Crispin's Day speech, he is not monologuing, he is dialoguing. He is responding to at least 7 dialogues that occurred the night before, when he went out disguised and began a conversation with his troops. And his troops said, how can we know we can trust this guy? And in disguise, and you can do it. Any leaders can do it. I've got a CEO friend in a hospital who, in the days when they had white coats, used to put on a white coat once a month and walk along the corridors, and nobody knew he was the CEO. He was in disguise. And he would talk to them about what was on their mind. I think this is have a look at that. The core of that is about engaging difference in his troops and enabling that to come together with the core notion of being together. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. For he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother. Be he ne'er so vile, this day will gentle his condition. Whoops. And gentlemen in England now abed shall think they were accursed they were not here. Etc. Yeah. Yes. You'll pass this stuff on, will you? Okay, yeah, that's good. Final, okay, this is the final thing, promise you. Our vision, our leadership vision, begin in dreams. I do not like the idea of visions and values, because most of the time they're not developed around dialogue. Not even near consultation, nonsense. This guy knows all about it, knew all about it. Yeats, 1916, in dreams begin responsibilities. Whoa. Because we are focusing on core values, we are focusing on differences, and the differences with the core values. Look at the dream speech. You know that he didn't, that was off the peg, yeah? As he was giving his predetermined speech, a soul singer kept saying, tell him about your dream. Tell him about your dream. And she did it twice, and he eventually went off the preparation and into that. But the heart of that notion of dream is the core narrative history of values, what it was to be a human being, what it was to be an American. And that was attached to the imagination of what it might be like to be an American in a multicultural organization. And in those dreams begin responsibilities. All things are ready if our minds be so, said Henry V. So a lot of leadership is about enabling our minds to be prepared about these core things. Leadership is enabling those who we are leading with to practice responsibility so that they can actually take responsibility at whatever level they are. She's worth reading, Heffernan, Willful Blindness. Without that, we are so often blind. There are lots of ways of seeing better, but you have to read the book to look through those. And this is me. I used to be blind, but I now can see. You see? When you... do you know the tough mudder? The tough mudder?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. When you go down under icy water and come back up again, then you can see a lot better. You need that kind of experience to move forward. Okay, thank you. That's it.